All from Lalita Kund. Okay. Thank you. Ram, Ram, Hari, Hari, Ram, Ram, Hari, Hari, Ram, 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 Hari, 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 Ram, Ram, Hari, Hari, Ram, Ram, Hari, 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 Krishna, Krishna, Hari, 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 Ram, Hari, Ram, Ram, Hari, 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 Ram, Ram, Hari, 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 Ram, Ram, Hari, Hari, Ram, Ram, Hari, 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 Ram, Ram, Hari, Hari, Ram, Ram, Hari, 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 Ram, Ram, Hari, Hari. Okay, devotees, here we go. Srila Prabhupada-lilamrita ki jai. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Presta Bhutale Shrimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadha Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna, 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama, 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 Hare Hare. Vanchikalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhya eva cha. Patitanam bhavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Right, so we are in London. The opening of the Berry Place Temple, the installation of Shri Shri London, Radha London Ishvara. Really amazing deities. And just how Prabhupada got them, well, you all heard, I think. You all heard, so how could it be anything other than Krishna's special arrangement for Prabhupada? Because Prabhupada is Prabhupada. Okay, Prabhupada was 73. He had now opened 21 temples in 3 years. Recently, he had told some of his disciples that they should try to form a governing body for ISKCON to relieve him of the management and allow him to concentrate fully on presenting Krishna-conscious literature. This literature could be introduced all over the world into homes, schools, and colleges for the benefit of everyone. It would be in such literature that he would live on. How much time he had left in this world he didn't know, he said. But he wanted to go on serving and trying to please his Guru Maharaj, life after life. Nevertheless, despite Prabhupada's desire to retire from active work and absorb himself in writing books, here he was installing deities in a new temple and protecting them from his disciples' carelessness. Someone who was there, probably Malati, anyway, someone who was there that day told me about that whole incident. Prabhupada suddenly just jumping up there and grabbing these 2 pillars, which were really heavy. And it was like Prabhupada suddenly became physically superhuman. And they couldn't understand, how did he manage that? It's just not humanly possible, but he did. Yeah. So, had he not been present, the celebration would have been a disaster. So many hard-working disciples, and they still needed his personal guidance. Well, we could use a bit now to... But anyway, what to do? We have no choice but to carry on. ISKCON was just beginning to grow. Prabhupada wanted to open not just 21 temples, but at least 108. His world traveling and book printing were just beginning, and like everything else, the number of disciples would increase. The prestige of his movement would increase, and with it, opposition from the atheists. Krishna consciousness was growing, and Prabhupada was in the forefront. All around I see bright, he said. That is the glory of Krishna. He saw himself as a servant of his spiritual master. The bright future was in Krishna's hands. Prabhupada called for Shamsundar. Although Prabhupada was angry at first because of the near disaster on the altar, he admitted that his disciples had done their best. The temple was beautiful, he told Shamsundar. He liked it. He then asked that a sign be placed out front with gold letters on a blue background. Radha Krishna Temple. This temple was constructed with great labor and effort by Shamsundar Das Adhikari. Well, when I went there first, it said Radha Krishna Temple. And anyway, it said Radha Krishna Temple, that's for sure. But I don't remember it saying the last bit about Shamsundar. On the day of Prabhupada's departure from London, he distributed some of his personal effects, such as sweaters and scarves, to his disciples. Well, let me just tell you a little story. I'm sure it doesn't come up. Well, actually, I'm not sure, but I'd be really surprised if it comes up later on about the disciples and not having it together sometimes. Prabhupada was coming in to London, and it was before I joined, but I don't know exactly what year, but it was before I joined. So Berry Place was full steam ahead. It was packed. About 50 to 60 devotees or something. Yeah. And Prabhupada was coming. And they had the arrival details, Prabhupada's flight and time and so on, at Heathrow. And so they were going to go on time. One devotee, his name was Sudajaya, I believe he's passed away. But Sudajaya was in charge of Spiritual Sky in England, and they were marketing anyway, incense, shall we say. And it was, oh gosh. Anyway, people were buying it. So that he was in charge. He was sort of, maybe not the only one, but possibly the only one. So he had a customer, wholesale customer, in Heathrow Airport. So the day that Prabhupada was arriving in the afternoon, something like that. In the morning, he was at Heathrow Airport visiting the customer. And he walked out of the customer's shop, and there was Prabhupada walking through the airport. He had arrived like some hours early. And Sudajaya was just, understandably sort of flummoxed. He didn't know what to do. But Prabhupada wanted to go. And I guess there was a servant with Prabhupada, because I don't think Prabhupada really traveled alone when he was flying. But Prabhupada just wanted to go. And so they started walking through the airport towards the exit and wherever he'd parked his vehicle, which was a Ford Transit van, if you know such vans. I mean, it's just the British equivalent of a Hiace, which was usually full of incense and, kind of, shall I just say, questionable quality incense. And the van smelt of incense. Oh, my Lord. So they're heading off in that direction. And of course, in those days, there were no cell phones. And he had to inform the temple. So as Prabhupada was walking, he sort of said, just, I'll be with you in 1 minute. Ran ahead into a public call box and made a call. And somebody answered the phone and he said, "Prabhupada's coming! Prabhupada's coming!" And the voice on the other end said, "We know Prabhupada's coming!" Bang! And that was it. And he had to go on with Prabhupada. So they just arrived at the temple. Oh, really? I mean, many things happened in those days. On the day, yes, right, okay. On the day of Prabhupada's departure from London, he distributed some of his personal effects, such as sweaters and scarves, to his disciples. He then went downstairs alone into the temple to see the deities. He offered fully prostrated obeisances on the floor for a long time, and then stood up, looking at Radha and Krishna. Yamuna. Prabhupada was looking at the deities with complete devotion. He loved those deities. He had commented about their exquisite beauty and how they complemented each other, how sometimes Radharani looked more beautiful, but how Krishna's moon-like face and eyes were shining. Prabhupada saw me and matter-of-factly said, "If you practice what I've taught you and follow the instructions of how I've taught, of how I've taught you to worship the deity, and if you read the books that we've printed, it is sufficient for you to go back to Godhead. You need not learn anything new. Simply practice what I've taught you, and your life will be perfect." Then he left, just left. Yeah, you've seen Radha Londonishwar, right? Krishna kind of looks like our Radhanath, do you think, or not? It's my imagination.
He's got a very naughty look. I always felt that he's got like a naughty look, like, something
Mischievous. Okay. Radharani there looks different from our Radharani, looks quite different. Yeah, anyway, okay. So, devotees, that is the end of chapter 30. And now, have you been to London? Did you see Radha London Ishwara? You've been. Right, you've been. You saw Radha London Ishwara, right? Soho Street. Radha London Ishwara, you saw. Yes. Okay, so now devotees, we begin chapter 31 of 55. There are 55 chapters. Chapter 31, a threat against ISKCON. Boston, December the 21st, 1969. More than 100 of Prabhupada's disciples and followers are in the lobby of the international terminal of Boston's Logan Airport. Kirtanananda Swami has come from New Vrindavan with a truckload of devotees. The devotees from New York are here with a large banner. New York ISKCON welcomes Srila Prabhupada. Most of the devotees wear heavy coats over their dhotis and saris and are chanting Hare Krishna. Some play drums and cymbals. Yeah, because New York is colder than London. People complain, devotees complain about London, but it's not that bad. I mean, it's nowhere near, oh my gosh, Moscow, what to speak of Siberia anyway. So, but New York is colder. Yeah, so the devotees were wearing heavy coats over their dhotis and saris and are chanting Hare Krishna. Some play drums and cymbals. A few babies and children are present. Waiting passengers can only watch, startled. Prabhupada's plane is late, and the devotees continue chanting, often leaping into the air with outstretched arms. They haven't seen Prabhupada in a long time, and they're waiting, expecting to see him at any moment, oblivious of the proprieties of being in public. The devotees chant emotionally, building almost to uncontrolled ecstasy. The state police step in to tell the biggest devotee, Brahmananda, cool it. The British police wouldn't say that. The chanting falls away to a murmur of japa. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. The plane from London arrives. The devotees are unable to see the passengers entering in the glassed-in immigration and customs area because the bottom 6 feet of the glass wall is painted black. Straining to see over the top, the devotees press forward, chanting, feverish, some almost hysterical. Suddenly they see Prabhupada's raised hand with bead bag on the other side of the wall. They can see only his raised hand and bead bag. They go wild. Fearlessly, with drums and cartels, the kirtan explodes again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Advaita is tearfully smashing the cartels together and chanting. Brahmananda jumping up and down, trying to glimpse into the customs room, is crying uncontrollably and yelling, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada, free of customs, suddenly appears before them. Kirtanananda Swami, reserved until now, leaps around airport chairs and runs to him. Everyone is pushing and running, trying to be where Prabhupada is. Prabhupada's saffron robes are wrinkled from the long flight, and he wears a knit sweater. He holds his white plastic attaché case in his left hand, and again raises his right arm with forefinger and thumb extended from the bead bag. He smiles wonderfully, beaming to his children. Devotees cheer and cry, "All glories to Prabhupada." As he walks toward a saffron-colored sofa in the airport lounge, the devotees move with him in an ecstatic wave, pressing in close. He sits down. Paramananda from New Vrindavan comes forward with his infant son, the first boy born in ISKCON, and holds him forward to Prabhupada for blessings. Prabhupada is smiling, and the devotees are completely, unabashedly blissful. "Where is Hayagriva?" Prabhupada asks. The question is repeated by the devotees, and big Hayagriva lurches through the crowd, grumbling and falling flat at Prabhupada's feet in obeisance. One by one, the leaders of the various ISKCON centers come forward and place garland after garland around Prabhupada. Prabhupada looks beyond the wall of devotees at the newsmen with their cameras and at the baffled, curious, and disdainful onlookers. A bystander says, "I think he must be some kind of politician." So, Prabhupada begins speaking. The spiritual master is to be worshipped as God. But if he is thinking that he is God, then he is useless. My request is, please don't take Krishna consciousness as a sectarian religion. Prabhupada explains that Krishna consciousness is a great science, culminating in pure love of God. These boys and girls had never heard of Krishna before, Prabhupada continues, but now they've taken it up so naturally, because it is natural. Prabhupada says that he is an old man, yet he is sure that even if he passes away, his students will continue the Krishna consciousness movement. The potency of this movement is such that it can awaken awareness of God within anyone's heart. After the lecture, Prabhupada stands and is escorted outside, where a limousine waits to drive him off through the newly fallen snow. Riding joyfully in the car with Prabhupada were Kirtanananda Swami, Brahmananda, Satswarup, and Purushottam. A professional chauffeur drove. Prabhupada talked of London. It was an old aristocratic city, he said, and the temple was in a very influential area near the British Museum. The location is, what is it called? Downtown? Not in England, in America. Anyway. They passed a large billboard advertising a restaurant and lounge, Continental. On seeing the billboard, Prabhupada said, "Chintamani, what is that?" "Oh no, Continental." The devotees looked at one another. Chintamani. Prabhupada had thought that the sign had read Chintamani, meaning the spiritual gems that make up the transcendental land of Krishna Loka. But Prabhupada himself was Chintamani, pure and innocent, coming to the cold, dirty city of Boston, yet always thinking of Krishna wherever he was. How fortunate to be with him. Satswarup glanced at the professional chauffeur. "Drive carefully," he said. Prabhupada spoke softly from the back seat. while the devotees in front peered back, barely able to see him in the darkness, and completely awed by his friendly yet inconceivable presence. The other day, he said, I told George Harrison that if he thought his money belonged to him, that was Maya. At the summer tunnel, the limousine pulled up at an automatic toll booth. The driver threw a coin into the chute, and the red light turned green. Prabhupada asked if sometimes people drove through without paying, and Brahmananda replied that an alarm would go off. They moved ahead into the summer tunnel, usually an eerie, nerve-wracking place, but not when riding with Prabhupada. I told George to give his money to Krishna, Prabhupada said. Not that he had to give it to Krishna by giving it to me necessarily, but that somehow or other he must spend all of his money for Krishna. But you are the only way to Krishna, Brahmananda said. Prabhupada laughed lightly. Yes, he admitted, at least in the West. This was the great privilege of being able to ride with Prabhupada, to hear him say little things or serious things, and to see his fathomless expression or his kind smiling. It was a rare opportunity. I am representing unadulterated teachings, Prabhupada continued. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, surrender to me, and I say, surrender to Krishna. It is very simple. So many swamis come and present themselves as Krishna, and it is all spoiled. But I say, surrender to Krishna. I do not say anything new or adulterated. Krishna says, surrender to me, and I say, surrender to Krishna. Prabhupada asked Brahmananda if 50,000 copies of Back to Godhead magazine were being printed. Brahmananda answered that they were. Good, Prabhupada replied. Turning his attention to Satsvarup, Prabhupada asked how the composing machine was working. And Satsvarup said that hundreds of pages were being composed each month. Prabhupada asked Kirtanananda Swami about New Vrindavan. New Vrindavan would improve, Prabhupada said. The only thing wrong was that it got blocked up in the winter. Each devotee in the car felt completely satisfied by his brief exchange with Prabhupada, and they rode with him, intoxicated in spiritual bliss. Most of the devotees had raced ahead to the temple on Beacon Street and were waiting excitedly. The limousine pulled up, and again the devotees were unrestrained in their adoration of their spiritual master. Regally, Prabhupada walked up the walkway, onto the porch steps, through the front door, and into the vestibule, where he gazed around at the purple walls and the pink and green doorways. Interesting. Surrounded by cheers and loving looks, he smiled. The second floor parlor, now the temple room, was filled with more than 150 disciples and guests, and they could see Prabhupada's form rise into view as he came up the stairs. He still carried his white attaché case in his left hand and his bead bag in his right. And although he had just come out of the winter's night, he wore no coat, only cotton robes and a sweater. He appeared radiant. Prabhupada approached the altar. He seemed to notice everything. The small Radha Krishna deities enthroned beneath a red velvet canopy. The larger deities of Jagannath, Subhadra and Balaram on a raised shelf above the picture of Lord Chaitanya and his Sankirtan party. Even the brass arti paraphernalia brightly shining on the small table near the altar. Turning to his secretary and traveling companion, Purushottam, he asked, "What do you think, Purushottam? Isn't this very nice?" Okay, let's see, what was this now? Isn't this very nice? Crossing the room. Prabhupada sat on the red velvet Vyasasana. He spoke and the audience was attentive. After praising the London centre, the deity worship there, the expertly made puris for Radha and Krishna, he turned toward the altar and said, "If you clean the deity's utensils, your heart will become cleansed." By polishing the deity's paraphernalia, he said, the devotees were cleaning their spiritual master's heart also. As he spoke, focusing simply and purely on devotion to the deity, the devotees suddenly realized the importance of this aspect of their Krishna consciousness. "Who has made these clothes?" Prabhupada asked, glancing at Radha and Krishna's little flounced dresses. "Sharadiya," a few devotees called out. Prabhupada smiled. "Thank you very much." Then he threw back his head and laughed. "Is Sharadiya still fighting with her husband?" The devotees and guests laughed, while Sharadiya covered her face with her hands. "Don't fight with your husband," Prabhupada said. "He's a good boy." Actually, I used to know him very well. He's really nice, really gentle devotee. You know him? Vaikunthanath, yeah. He is a good boy. Anybody that comes to Krishna consciousness is good. He then asked to see the rest of the house. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Any comment or question? One, if you don't mind. Yeah.
Marge, you were reading something, I don't know if I misheard or misunderstand, but you said when we're cleaning the deity's paraphernalia, it cleanses the heart of the spiritual master, but the spiritual master's heart is already pure. I don't really understand.
Yes, it's pure. Of course it's pure. Well, particularly Prabhupada. But in Krishna consciousness, we have the transcendentally easily understandable phenomenon of pure, more pure, and even more pure, and most pure, and even more most pure. And it just, there's no end to it. So, yeah, anyway, that's a fact. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you, Marge.
Hare Krishna. Maharaj, you were reading about Srila Prabhupada when he was distributing his scarves and hats. So for a disciple, these items would be worshipable, but for practical reasons, in a cold place like that, could the disciples wear them? And would it be fine?
Generally they would keep them. Yeah, they would keep them. If they had an altar, like if they're living outside the temple. put them on the altar.
Mm.
Yeah. I mean, it depends. You know, you know Big Bhagwat, I suppose. Really Big Bhagwat. He went on a fast and became, like unbelievably skinny. And Prabhupada gave him a set of clothes, and Bhagwat was able to wear Prabhupada's kurta. Yeah. So, it may be possible to use the things. Yeah.
I heard something about the etiquette with this from either Hari Saripata or Shri regarding the remnants of spiritual master. Said that you can wear them while the spiritual master is present, but after he's passed away, then those things should be worshippable.
I see, okay.
Like socks and things like that we shouldn't wear ever.
Oh,
Yeah, those are from the lotus feet of the spiritual master.
I see.
Should be always worshipped. It was from one of them. I'm not sure if they got it from Prabhupada. It was their own realization.
I see. Okay. I'll see if I can ask Harry. Sorry, we're in touch. Okay, thank you. That's interesting. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.